are you going to use the tool to enhance your learning, or are you going to use it to cut corners? And that's not just in education, that's industry, that's professionals, that's everyone who's using generative AI. We really should be using it to build and expand our learning and our capacity, and not to, stop thinking for ourselves, not to cut corners and get around that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the OSE podcast. My name is Dallas Wobbington. I'm the coordinator of OSE, and I'll go ahead and give our guest a chance to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Audrea Caraway, and I am the Online Student Experience Manager for the Division of Student Affairs here at UNT.
Awesome. Well, welcome back. You're no stranger to the OSE podcast.
No, I am not. But I'm excited to be here, and I think our topic today is pretty fun.
Oh yeah, we've got plenty of things in store for you. So today's episode, we're going to be focusing on cracking the AI code, how online students can use AI to be successful as a student. So basically, we're just going to get straight into it.
Let's do it.
All right. So just kind of give us just a bit of background on what your experience of AI has been.
Yeah, so I was kind of thrown into it. So in my role, I work with online students, obviously. I also chair the division's technology committee. And so working with other departments in the Division of Student Affairs about how we can use technology more efficiently, what issues we see with technology and that type of thing. And so I think when ChatGPT came out, and everyone's freaking out because what is this? AI has been around for a very long time, but I think ChatGPT is really what opened it up to where it was accessible now to the everyday person. And obviously we saw our students using it and everyone's talking about it. And so from there, UNT formed a task force on artificial intelligence, and specifically the task force sought to figure out what types of things should be in place, especially concerning generative AI at the institution. What things should we be looking into? What are pros and cons? What policies might need to be in place and things like that. And we don't have any policies at our institution right now. Issues around generative AI in the classroom or things like that are kind of dealt with through academic integrity. But this task force was formed in the Division of Student Affairs. I was asked to represent DSA. And so from there, obviously learned a lot from being on the task force, went to conferences, did workshops, did my own research and things like that. And then eventually I started presenting for people, which is kind of weird because I do feel like I still am very much so in a space where I'm still curious, I'm still learning and things like that. But most of my presentations and work have been for staff and about how can they use AI responsibly in their roles. What do they need to know about artificial intelligence? How can they just be educated about the topic so that they know what students might ask about it, or what issues might concern students, or how it might affect their work and things like that. And so that is really what my experience has been working with AI. I think in an effort to become more knowledgeable about AI, and specifically generative AI, I have tested out a ton of platforms. And there are so many things, and we're starting to see AI integrated into some of the apps that we use every day that didn't have AI before, but now they do. I mean, I'm sure everyone is seeing that in the things they're currently using, even on social media, where you'll see that some of them have AI instead of their search or things like that. And so we're starting to see it everywhere. And so I think I'm amazed at all of the platforms, because usually when someone comes to an AI workshop, they're like, okay, tell me about ChatGPT. And I'm like, or the thousands of other things that exist, and things like that. So yeah, that's been my experience working with AI so far.
Oh, yeah, it's been really interesting, especially over the past couple years, like you said, how accessible AI is starting to become. So we had things like ChatGPT, but even now with Google, when you Google anything, it will automatically come up with an AI
Yes, it does.
summary for you.
And I have feelings about that because I think in some ways, like I would prefer a search than like an AI summary. And so I think that move to that, just like almost being the default, is sometimes frustrating. But I'm also someone who likes like my tools to work the way that I'm used to them working. So it could also just be me like not vibing with change.
Yeah. For me, I typically I'm like very 50-50 on it, especially for something like the AI summary with Google, where one, I'm glad that it kind of just gives me the answer up front, but also as a standard user, I have to make sure that, the AI is collecting all the information from everywhere on the internet. So I got to double check as a user, is this legitimate? Like, is the information it's deriving this answer from a legitimate source with the data and logistics to back it up, because it could literally be something from like a random website, especially since AI and our use of the internet is really focused on your personal algorithm. So if you research like very particular things from particular resources, what you get may be a lot different from what other people are getting.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that's why I prefer search, because I think in some ways, like when you automatically get that AI summary, like it has come to a conclusion, and I like to arrive at my own conclusions.
I completely understand, especially for whenever I was in college, we didn't have ChatGPT. Of course, we still had the internet. We had millions of things available for us. But when it comes to certain things like researching and trying to see which resources are credible and legit, it and of course, that's where I think I'm very particular with it, is like you can provide me with all this information that's AI generated, but I'm still going to like research and see if it's correct. And then you already know how I feel about the M dash. So if you're not like completely familiar with AI or like using it for, writing and essays and whatnot, it's becoming a bit of a telltale that if someone uses AI, there's typically M dashes within their writing. But I didn't go to 4 years of getting my degree in English for someone to say that M dashes automatically equal AI. No, I use it casually. I use it in text messages. And so I'm very passionate about the M dash. I can go millions and millions of
I, on the other hand, have never in my life ever used an M dash in any of my writing. So yes, I am thrown off by the M dash in responses from generative AI sometimes, because I'm like, what is that? I will also specifically ask things to remove them.
Yes.
Because yeah, it's not something that I would use. But honestly, I will say I don't really use AI for writing. Like, I think I may use it to help structure something or to help clarify my thoughts, but I think there's value in my own voice as a writer. I think writing helps us think. And so for me, I don't know that there's ever anything that I'm just like, write this from ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or Gemini or whatever it is we're talking about, that I would use that. I think it's more of like I write it first and then I might ask like, how can I improve this? Or I might write it first and say, okay, I need this to sound more directed towards parents, because it might be parent communications that are going out from UNT, or I want this more directed towards students or things like that, like kind of tweaking some of the things. But I think just straight taking writing from any of these generative AI platforms, like we're all starting to kind of see like, what does it sound like? Even with AI generated images, they kind of have a look to them, and it's off-putting, and things like that. And so I think like the human creativity, the power of your own unique voice is really important as well. And we want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in all of this generative AI stuff that's going on.
Yep. Speaking of, using like your legitimate writing, not just using it to straight up create things for you. So there's a lot of like speculation and controversy that comes with the use of AI, especially coming into academics and higher education. So what do you think about the debate around that?
I think there are great arguments on both sides, but I think it comes down to any tool that someone is going to use, right? So even if we're just taking the internet, a student can make a decision to, I am going to use the internet to see if someone has a copy of this exam with the answers, and I'm going to see if I can find it. And instead of learning the material, I'm going to just use what I search. And we've, people have been able to do that for a number of years, and things like that. But there's also a difference of, man, I'm really struggling to understand this concept in my class. I wonder if there's another research or another resource on the internet. Maybe there is, another professor that teaches it in a different way. That's something that I've always told students of, like, if you're feeling lost with a topic, like, put in a search bar at YouTube. There are instructors teaching all over the world, and perhaps you just need someone to say it a little bit differently in order to grasp it. So that's a very different use of the internet. And I think that is the same thing with artificial intelligence in education, is that, are you going to use the tool to enhance your learning, or are you going to use it to cut corners? And that's not just in education, that's industry, that's professionals, that's everyone who's using generative AI. At the same time, this also has to change the way we teach in education, and the reality is that our students, we are preparing them to go out into the world and make a difference, whether that's in the workforce, whether that is through, service, or, philanthropy, and just different things like that. Like, you need to be able to find your place in the world, make your mark in your world, contribute to society, and you will have access to these tools. So in some ways, we can't just say, no, we're going to shut this down. We're not going to have anything to do with it, because you need to be knowledgeable of the things that you're going to be expected to work with and be knowledgeable about in the workforce. And the cat's already out of the bag, right? Like, we can't, like, Pandora's box is open. There's no, like, going back and saying, no, we're not going to use AI. Now, I do think there are valid arguments around the environmental impact, around, is it just our job to produce, and, like, is the only thing or only measurement of success for us going to be productivity? Because I don't think that should be it either, right? Like, I think we really have to grapple with a lot of ethical and, philosophical issues surrounding our use of AI. But I also think that instructors are really going to have to change how they teach. If AI is the tool, how do we measure whether or not students know enough to use the tool effectively? And we're starting to see people do different things around that. I feel like AI disclosure has become very big, where just as a part of, expectations or good practices around AI is disclosing your use of AI. Some instructors, at different institutions, and probably even some here, have it attached with, like, their assignments of, not only do you have this assignment, but as a part of this project or a part of this paper, you also have to disclose how you use generative AI. And some are even adding, like, reflections about, do I think this helped or hurt my learning, and things like that. And so I think that's what we have to figure out right now. And I think we have instructors on both ends of the spectrum. And there are some instructors that are really like, yes, I tell my students to use it, like, from day one, like, we pull it up, and we're gonna use it. And I have these assignments that are designed to work with AI and things like that. And then we also have, other instructors that are like, I don't want it in my classroom. I'm gonna make them go back to the blue books where you're handwriting your answers, and they're gonna take their test in class, and it's gonna be handwritten, and they just want no parts to do with it. And so there's a spectrum, and I think that's confusing right now, or can be confusing right now for students, because, in one class it might be, completely fine and acceptable, and in another class it might not be. So just like with everything else, different instructors have different policies for their classrooms. Make sure you understand what the expectations are around AI use in your individual courses, because it will change from course to course, simply because people have different stances on how they want it implemented in their classroom.
I feel like every generation has its own sort of like pros and cons with technology, especially being introduced into education. So I remember the saying of you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket, so you have to know how to do basic math. But now we have phones, like cell phones and smartphones were introduced, and then we have like this generation is AI. And so, back then it was like you're not going to have like someone be able to write your papers for you all the time or be able to like create images for you all the time. And now we have something like AI. And so it's like what you mentioned earlier, we've opened Pandora's box. Like we can't close it. It's already there, it's already open. So it all really comes down to, are we using it ethically? But speaking of the pros and cons of that, what do you feel, and you kind of mentioned a couple of them, what do you feel are the potential cons of working with AI?
A hard one that I have been grappling with right now is the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. I have kids. I want my kids to have a planet. I believe that we should be working to make sure that our planet is safe and clean, and that, we have resources for future generations, not just my kids, but like generations down the line. And so I'm very concerned about the environmental impact of artificial intelligence. It just takes a lot of water, a lot of energy, and things like that. And then even issues around like where these plants and factories are built, and what does that do to the local environment where they are, and how are we making that equitable for the people that live there? Like, is it really fair for, I don't know, open AI to come and build a plant in your neighborhood that is now affecting the quality of your water, potentially the quality of your air, and you're not making any money or taking any benefit, from that goes into, that the company's profits and things like that. And so I think we have to be fair. I don't think that AI use will go away, but I think that we have to now be very proactive about, okay, how are we making this fair for like the local environmental impact, and how are we planning for future generations? I also am concerned about what AI will do to our brains, because how we interact with technology starts to kind of rewire some things in our brain. I think we can talk about kids and screen time, and when they're exposed to screen time and that type of thing. And so I think we will see similar things with artificial intelligence. What happens to our brains when we no longer write? And people are already starting to do some of that research, and put out some of those articles about like what happens. And so I think, again, it goes back to, I think, seeing the value in your humanity, seeing the value in your own voice, in your own ideas, in your own creativity, and using artificial intelligence as a tool versus a replacement for you. We don't want to replace ourselves as humans, okay? Like we need to be human, and we need to find out like what are the great parts of being a human, and how can we use AI to make more time for that and to elevate that. And then I think another one, it's a concept you don't hear it like a ton of places. We talk about it in the field of instructional design, this concept of a digital divide. And so some of the earlier digital divides that we saw were, do people have access to a computer, and like what opportunities do they have when they have a computer in the home versus when they don't? My kids think it's wild that growing up, we did not have a computer in our home for a very long time. And it was a very big deal when we got one. And it was just the one computer in our household that everyone, my parents, my siblings, we all took turns using. We had the dial-up AOL, we could be on the phone and the internet at the same time. Like, that's how old I am. And things like that. But now, like, my kids' experience is completely different. Like, they can't even fathom it. They all have Chromebooks. My husband and I, we all have our own laptops and a desktop computer in our home. And so, that first digital divide was like, who has access to this technology and who does not? The second digital divide that came about was who is knowledgeable about this technology. And we kind of saw it, I would say, right around maybe Gen Z and maybe the later millennials, in that people assumed that this generation is the technology generation. They were born having always had access to technology. So people stopped like teaching it,
Yep.
teaching the function of how a computer works. And what we found is that like a lot of students, they know their technology on their phone or their tablet, but actually sitting at a computer, like no one had taught them like what are different like file types, and like what do you do with this, and what does it mean open with, and having these different like the things like as millennials, we were just kind of, and I'm an elder millennial, we were kind of like learning technology, so we were like really in the weeds of like how does it work, but we were also taught, like we had a computer lab class, we went and we learned how to type, we learned like how computers worked. And then I think, you know, people kind of assumed that the generations after us would just know that, and so that was another type of digital divide of not, yes, people have the technology, but do they know how to use it? And that type of thing. And so I think this next one will be, you know, those with access to generative AI and those who don't. As much as I feel like I talk about AI all the time now in my work and things like that, there are still definitely people in my life, and, you know, people that I'm in community with who haven't used it at all, have never opened ChatGPT, have had no exposure to it. And so what does that do, and how do things remain equitable? What do we do in a world where, you know, some people have this really valuable tool that really helps them to be more efficient, especially when used correctly and things like that, and kind of supercharges their work. And someone else who is working maybe just as hard, but for ethical reasons, for personal reasons, for access reasons, is not using this. And how do we make those work?
So we could talk about AI all day.
We could.
It's very interesting. I mean,
Well, we are.
we can go ahead and move forward to the next question, which is, how do you balance the academic integrity with the rise of generative AI systems that can produce things like essays or solve problems?
Yeah, I think really and truly, I think we need to rethink how we teach as education. I think we need to rethink our assignments and think about it in a context, in a world of where students have AI. And so instead of saying, okay, you're going to need to write this essay, we're going to have to focus a lot more on the process. And so, okay, you need to brainstorm, you might need to outline, you might, and I'm not an English major, I don't really like writing, or, you know, I'm a math and like data person. So I'm trying to use this example with writing, and I'm like, I feel like I'm going to stumble all over the place.
Don't worry, I got you.
There is a writing process. And so I think being able to communicate the process and communicate why you made decisions at certain points gets to how you critically thought about the process, which I think is more important for learning than maybe the essay itself. So I think we might, you know, start thinking about the process and our own decision making and reflection process a bit more. We need to get to the core of, okay, why am I creating this assignment? What am I hoping students are able to demonstrate from this assignment? And how do I think about that in the context of artificial intelligence? And I would like to see kind of more practical application for assignments and things like that. I think that will better prepare students for the workforce anyway. I think a lot of times, especially like in an interview process, people want to know about your process of how you work. And so I think being able to describe that effectively is really good. It was a really good experience for students. And so my hope is that we kind of start to think more about the process than the outcome. And that, again, that instructors are giving guidance on how AI is appropriately used as a tool versus a replacement for your thought. Now, on the student side, I think you got to think about why you're here. You know, does it really make sense for you to pay for a college education that you simply just cheated your way through. The reality is it's going to be hard and it's going to be embarrassing for
Yeah.
you. Like when you get out into the workforce and it turns out you don't know anything, you're going to be less confident, and things like that. And so I think, and even though it may seem like a quick thing now, and it's hard to think, long term when it's, 11 11, 12, and your your assignments due at midnight. I've been there. Sorry. Yes. Things like that. We've probably all been there, and things like that. And I think it comes down to like your personal integrity, your personal brand. What do I stand for? And I think we're gonna have to like have decisions and think about that. And I think that's important in an era where someone can just go to, whatever their platform of choice is, and say, do this or that type of thing. Everyone can also do that same thing, right? And so there are always going to be things that set people apart in terms of their performance or, their innovation, their creativity, and things like that. And so there's a difference between like having, all of this data or all of this information, but being able to translate that into new innovative things. Because I think that's something to recognize, is that generative AI is not necessarily like creating new ideas. It is it's predicting what the answer should be based on like its huge kind of source of data. And in some ways that is really powerful, because as a human, I will never be able to go through that amount of data. And so that is helpful to have that information. But again, that innovation, that thinking outside of the box. And so I think wisdom, I think, critical thinking, creativity, innovation are still going to be things that establish people as different from the rest of the pack.
So kind of going back into the use of AI in higher education, how do you think students can use AI tools to help reduce the barriers for non-traditional students and underrepresented students?
Yeah, so I think a great use of AI is as a learning coach, right? So I'm learning this topic or I'm studying this topic. What are some key terms I need to know, and that type of thing? Or give me an example of this theory in practice, like helping you deepen your understanding. And AI can really create like a very personalized experience. One thing that I was using AI for, this was a few months ago. I was trying to like create an automation in Power Automate, which I'd never used before. Like I'd used Zapier before, which I feel like was a little bit easier. But Power Automate just required a bit more. It was a little bit more complex. It was my first time doing it. And so, I had a co-pilot help me, and I was able to give it feedback. So I was able to say, hey, I put this into this automation. I'm getting this error. Like, how can you help me? What do I need to know? And I knew enough about like the process to be able to figure out, okay, what piece am I missing or what I think might be wrong, and try different things. And so I think like being able to share what your understanding of something is and asking it, okay, what am I missing? Or, bring this together for me is a really great use of AI, especially for non-traditional or underrepresented students. I also know for students who are they're first in their family to go to college, or for me, I wasn't first in my family to go to college, but I was first in my family to go to grad school. And that was very intimidating and scary for me. And so even just I felt like there were parts of the process that like other people knew that I didn't. And so it would have been nice that, I didn't have ChatGPT, y'all. I told y'all I'm old. It would have been nice to be able to say, okay, I am preparing for this graduate program. What are some tips you recommend for new graduate students? This is what I've done. This is what I plan to research. Help me, help me figure out the things I'm doing, or tell me what I'm missing, because you don't know what you don't know. And so I think being able to figure out what you don't know is a good benefit for students. What else? I know that there are some people, I don't do this because I think it's a little weird. There are some people that really like make their whatever platform of choice like really like personal to them, like they give it a name and almost like a personality. And things like that. And so, there's lots of information about how representation in education matters, and seeing yourself in the curriculum matters to your learning and your lived experiences, and being able to connect your lived experiences. And so in some ways, again, I think because of how personalized you can make your learning experience using AI, being able to say, tell it a story maybe about yourself or your family, and say, okay, now relate this to this topic that I'm studying, or things like that. Like definitely a better way to see yourself in the curriculum. So those are the things that I can think of like off the top of my head. Breaking down and understanding processes that may not be automatically, obvious, or things like that. Maybe even like asking, I think in all of our interactions, especially in higher education, I feel like there are a lot of unspoken rules or suggestions. And I think we're trying to be better about sharing those for everyone. But, being new in the workplace and saying, okay, this is my first time at a job. What should I be doing in my first week? What should I be doing in my first 30 days? Or I am new to this institution. I'm the first in my family to go to college. What are some of the unspoken rules of being a successful college student, and seeing what it gives you back, or even sharing like, these are some of my strengths and talents. These are things that I'm good at. What types of opportunities should I be looking for on my campus to be able to strengthen those things? I think those are really great uses.
I think it's also kind of nice what you're mentioning in terms of making the AI kind of personal to you. For example, I actively use like ChatGPT because sometimes whenever I'm trying to come up with like a catchy caption for an Instagram post, it's just like not clicking to me. And so I kind of make it personal in the sense of like tailoring it towards University of North Texas, tailoring it towards online students. And then I also tell ChatGPT a bit about what sort of tone and what sort of like verbiage I'm wanting to make it more personal and relatable. Because I'm sorry for those who use ChatGPT in terms of their writing. I can tell when you use ChatGPT.
We all can.
We can all tell. For example, whenever, I've seen students use AI for their cover letters and, for their resumes, I can tell. And so it doesn't feel personal.
I have talked to lots of employers, both on campus and off campus, and it's very off-putting, because I think the way it reads to an employer is like, you didn't even care enough to put in the effort to write it yourself. And so I think, again, like asking for help, asking how you can improve it and things like that. But we really do we want to know your voice. We want to see you like come through in your application materials. Oh, one thing I forgot to talk about using AI to reduce barriers. I think like role playing is something that's really good as well, that people have been talking about, that whether you're like role playing in an interview, or I know sometimes I have a little bit of social anxiety, especially if if it's more of like a social situation where I'm like not quite sure like how it's gonna go. I might do a description of like, I've got to have this conversation with this person. We're having a little bit of this conflict. Like, how can I still be professional? Can you role play this conversation with me? And it just helps me feel like more confident going into it, having like done almost like a rehearsal. And no, it won't be exactly the same, because whoever I'm talking to will obviously have their own thoughts and things like that, but it does kind of help bring up things that might come up in a conversation or things like to be prepared to answer in an interview that you may not have known. But again, that's part of the prep work. That's what you do before. My dad cracked me up yesterday. I was talking to him and he said he just got off the phone with his boss, and his boss was complaining because they were doing interviews through Zoom, and his boss was like, I just know they're asking ChatGPT these questions. He was like, it's taking them so long to answer, and they keep looking away from the camera and typing and things like that. And it was just like a very grumbly conversation. But I think those are things to be aware of especially like in an interview process, of use it to help you prep and things like that. But when it gets to like actually doing the cover letter, actually doing your interview, like you need to be able to do that on your own.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'm hiring you. I'm not hiring the AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just keep that in mind.
Because I could use the AI.
Oh, yeah. Kind of going back into higher education and the use of AI, how do you think institutions can try to strike a balance between embracing AI innovation, but also protecting those core educational values?
Yeah, I just did a presentation with the leadership for the Division of Student Affairs this summer, and that is some of what we talked about is one, what are our values, right? And how can we align our AI use with those values? Because I do think, in some ways, like we have a responsibility to protect student data and information. And so that's one thing that I am super hard on with everyone is like, we are not putting student data into any of these platforms and things like that. And so I think it comes down to trust. And that's the question that I posed to staff is, our responsibility is to model responsible use in a lot of ways. Like students look up to us to set an example of how we are supposed to engage in these things. And so I think the question goes back to, would students still trust me if they knew I used AI in this way? And I think at every step, at every juncture, we've got to pause and ask ourselves that question before we do it, and then decide from there. And I think that goes back to, I think it's fair arguments. I think I was in a Facebook group and, people were frustrated because they were like, well, why am I being knocked as a student for utilizing AI and my instructor utilized AI to create their course materials, right? And I think, again, it goes back to how they could use it, because perhaps like they're an expert, but perhaps like they could create a more fun, engaging assignment with the help of AI. And that is a good use of it. But if they're, just kind of cutting corners and I didn't prepare for class today, so let me just have ChatGPT do a lesson, like that's not a good use of it, right? So we have to model those things. And so I think we have to think about our values, think about what do we want students to gain from their experience at our institution, and we have to align our AI use and our AI policies around those things.
I think one of the interesting things, especially coming from a former teacher standpoint, is students are going to use AI, instructors, your students are going to use AI, but trying to come up with different ways to make sure that they're using it ethically. And also, I'm personally a fan of them doing like those secret little like white font things to make sure they don't use AI, because, if they do it and they find out something's wrong with it, maybe they'll take it a little differently next time.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. But I think sometimes like that gets hard to prove. And I think that's what we're seeing, even like going through academic integrity is like can you prove it? Like, and I think that's very hard to prove. Even like when you're talking about the M-dash and you love the M-dash, like what if someone knocked something that you wrote intentionally and specifically using the M-dash because they thought that it was AI generated? And so like, that's what it is hard. That line is hard. And so I don't think we need to be in the business of policing AI use. I think we need to be in the business of teaching and modeling responsible AI use, and we need to rethink how we educate and think about our assignments in the context of AI as a tool that students have access to.
Thankfully, no one has knocked my M-dash use, but I am prepared for the day if it happens. I'll just show them a picture of my English degree on the wall.
And you can defend it. So that's completely different for you. And I think like we're all responsible for being able to defend and stand by our work. And I think that's across the board for students, for faculty, for staff, for researchers, for everyone. Like, if I make a decision at my job and, good or bad, I've got to be responsible and accountable for that decision. And so I think, again, in our AI use, we got to think about, can I still be responsible and accountable for the conclusion that I came to? With an M dash, you can, because you know what it's for. With an M, if you ever see an M dash from me, that is a problem, because I cannot be accountable for that at all. I don't know why we would use an M dash. It's not something that I regularly write with.
So let's go on to the last question, which is, where do you see the future of AI going in higher education?
Oh gosh, a lot of places. So on a college campus, you have like people typically, we're seeing them in like data science and even in learning technologies and things like that, who are specifically like researching and building large language models and that type of thing. And so I think there's like that technical aspect of artificial intelligence and people being in the weeds of that. I don't get too much into that. I'm definitely on the how do we use it and apply it side of things. But I do think like some of the things we're already seeing is most colleges and schools, if not all at UNT, already have classes this fall, this year, around artificial intelligence. And that's across all subjects. And all of those classes look very different. But there is definitely an effort of how do we teach students how to use artificial intelligence. We're starting to see some universities develop their own suite of AI tools for their institutions. UNT launched a few things a couple of weeks ago and things like that. And so you can search it on the UNT website to see what those tools are and how we can use it. But I think kind of, customized AI solutions that maybe have like some institutional data attached to them so they can provide, personalized feedback and responses to students is something that folks have been looking into. But I think at large, I think we're going to change the way we educate. I think we have to. And so I think like that is probably the biggest thing in higher education is rethinking education and how the goal of an essay changes. And I think essay is like the easiest example, so that's why we keep mentioning it. But, in a world where students are not going to necessarily have to write from scratch per se, like what does that process look like? And how do we change like what an essay would tell us before? And will we still be able to assess learning in that way using those methods? And so I think that's there. I also think that, our students lead the way, and our students have environmental concerns. I think our students are starting to see kind of some of the negative sides of not just artificial intelligence, but like just a ton of technology in general. People talk about going back to dumb technology, flip phones making a resurgence, people and their record players and things like that. Like, we're starting to kind of see like a step back from technology, because I think also our students are seeing how technology affects them. And so I think obviously we'll continue to have conversations. There will continue to be innovation, because the pace of technological innovation just keeps getting faster and faster and faster, every decade. And so I am curious and excited to see like how people innovate, because I'm almost like what else can we do? And that type of thing. But there's always something else that we can do.
I think since situations like this with AI, it can almost apply to technology in general, is it's going to advance. Like we are going to be able to do things we've never been able to do before with AI and with technology. And so you can either fight it or you can work with it. It's already here. Just kind of like figure out some different ways that we could like when it comes to like the environmental impact, what are some ways that we can try to draw back and lessen that environmental impact, since we know that people are going to use AI. But what can we do to kind of help make it into a positive experience.
Yeah. I think so. And I mean, I think everyone's got to lean, wherever you stand on the issue of AI, I think everyone's got to at least lean into creativity and be knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you can make your own personal decisions and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is it for this episode. It was a long episode. Audrea, where can people reach out and potentially learn more?
Oh, yeah. So, look, check out what the online student experience is doing. We are here from you. I'm very passionate about online students. I was an online student myself during one of my graduate degrees, and it was hard. It was hard. And so I think I lean into a lot of like, what do I wish existed for me when I was in that experience? And I do a lot of listening to students. So you can find us at ose.unt.edu. You can email us at ose@unt.edu. You can follow us on social media, look for OSE or Online Student Experience, and you can find us there. But my hope is that you'll engage with us. If you want to learn more or talk more about AI or things like that, send us an email. We can schedule a Zoom or something like that, and we can chat more about it. I love talking and reaching out to students.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Made it this far. Thank you. And we'll see you in the next episode. Going green.
Going green.